Devil May Cry 5 is one of my favorite games. The sheer amount of freedom and creativity you can express while playing as Dante is a uniquely satisfying experience to me. I love it. But it wasn't always like this. When Devil May Cry 5 was announced, I didn't actually have any experience with the series, so while I waited, I decided to try out 4. For some more context, I also didn't have much third-person action game experience in general, so I knew going into it that I would need to take some time to learn controls, mechanics, and all that stuff that was new to me. At first, things went well. You start off the game as Nero, a newcomer to the series, as opposed to Dante, the main character from 1 through 3. All things considered, Nero is more simple in the sense that he has less moves, weapon options, and the like. For me at the time, this was a positive, as I felt I could handle what was presented to me. Then you get to Mission 12, and surprise, you're Dante, and basically for the rest of the game. I was plenty excited at first, but my experience with him in the end was actually just miserable. Most things were either going right over my head, or I was purposely ignoring them altogether. I'd mash Y on every enemy and call it a day, but that was not the case when I got to play him in 5. I even recently went back to 4 and enjoyed the Dante half of the game. So what was the difference? Why did I give Dante more of a chance in my second playthrough than the first? What motivates someone to learn all of a game's mechanics and features? What can a game do to facilitate a good learning environment? And what can you do to absorb everything as best you can? This is what I'd like to explore in today's video. To start, I'd like to split things into 2 categories: the external environment and the game's internal environment. Let's start looking into the makeup of an external environment with a goal in mind, literally. Whether a conscious decision or not, we have goals and expectations in mind when we choose to play a game. If you're in the mood to relax and unwind, Ultrakill is probably not the best choice, and Animal Crossing might not be the best game to test your tactics. I will say, though, that the brain is a complex thing that I'm not an expert on, and some may find a sense of peace or familiarity with shooters, such as Ultrakill. The point is, everyone's needs are different and constantly fluctuating. Thus, so are our goals. Playing the wrong game at the wrong time can greatly affect your learning experience. Whether you're feeling too tired after a hard day's work to dive into learning new fighting game tech, or just too hyper to focus on detail-oriented strategy games. There's also plenty of things outside the self that can get in the way. Distractions, a lack of time to play, perhaps physical ability. There is an infinite combination of things that could make up an external environment, and the requirements of a game varies as well. You'll need more free time and the ability to focus for a while without being distracted to more successfully do raids in your favorite MMO. If your environment does have a lot of distractions, maybe games that you can pause or pick up and put down quickly in general will have a higher chance of being something you actually stick with. The external environment is something we can change or adapt to much more in comparison to changing how a video game actually functions. Game developers can't control your life though, thankfully, for now. What they can do is create an environment in-game that facilitates learning and experimentation with the very mechanics they've created. Again, I didn't grow up with the series or genre, so I was learning as an adult how the games worked. Luckily, Capcom doesn't toss you into the deep end as soon as you start. You are given a tutorial of some basic mechanics, movement, dodging, shooting, the 3-hit combo, simple, digestible things to start with, which makes sense. At this level of complexity, I'm absorbing things like a sponge, because I'm only learning the basic buttons after all. This is an example of pacing, one of the 4 components of game environments that I'd like to talk about in this video. Good pacing, as well as the balance of the other 3 components, is going to be subjective, and the goal of a developer would naturally be to make things as accessible and interesting to all kinds of people from different backgrounds. Had they given the player every single move available in the game at the start, you'd likely be overwhelmed and would neglect a large portion of features for at least a while. A player can only take on so much at a time. Some examples of pacing throughout multiple genres would be Doom 2016 throwing more difficult enemies at you over time, Houseflipper 2 slowly introducing new tools and ways to interact with said tools to furnish your houses, and the starter classes of Final Fantasy XIV drip-feeding you new abilities for dozens of levels while you acclimate. On the flip side, some examples of a lack of pacing are the majority of fighting games and the later unlockable classes of Final Fantasy XIV. Fighting games often simply have an entire move list unlocked from the very start, the very thing that I said would overwhelm me earlier. The most intimidating for most would be Tekken, where a single character often has over 100 unique moves. There's definitely more ways to pace a game other than gatekeeping features, but it seems like the most prominent one to me. Let's get back to Devil May Cry 4 for now. I've beaten the first level now, and I'm given the option to unlock new moves of my own choosing. I'm looking through the list and I see Streak, a ground-based move that lets me advance towards an enemy and attack. Seems like a good move to me, but what about the equivalent in the air, Caliber? Well, most of the enemies that I've fought so far are on the ground. And what I didn't know at the time was that comboing in the air is much safer for the player because most ground-based enemies can't get you when you're in the air. But in the end, I decided to ignore Caliber for now, because the usefulness of it was not apparent to me. Usefulness, the second component I'd like to talk about, will be relative to the goals of the game's tasks at hand. Ideally, a developer will make the usefulness of a feature self-evident. A good example of a mechanic having an apparent use would be Doom 2016's and Doom Eternal's Chainsaw, which has the clear handiness of both instantly killing a demon and dropping a buttload of ammunition for you, in turn letting you kill more demons. However, a developer can just manually set a mechanic's value to infinity by making it necessary. If you need an item that can only be crafted to progress the story, you better learn how to craft. A rather infamous example is the Monsoon boss from Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. While not actually 100% necessary, you're going to have a much easier time if you learn how to parry. How well you're going to remember and use these features in the future when you were forced to learn them is up for debate, but it does by default make you learn them. Some people, myself included, don't like being forced to do a thing. So if something isn't necessary and seems useless, why learn how to do it? In Tekken, the character Brian has the ability to taunt the opponent. You could say taunting itself has psychological effects on the opponent, but other than that you probably wouldn't think much else about the move. However, when Brian raises his knee in his taunt, it counts as an unblockable attack, something that is quite rare in the game. On top of that, it can be cancelled into another move, usually Jet Uppercut, hence the sensibly dubbed technique Taunt Jet Upper. Unless you both have the knowledge of how useful this taunt can be and the skill to execute it, which, by the way, it's hard, you likely won't bother thinking any further about the taunt at all. But what if a seemingly useless feature or mechanic looks cool? Really cool. Maybe it's extremely impractical, but a total spectacle. Now we're getting into the third component I'd like to talk about, emotional appeal. Being cool is not the only kind of emotional appeal a thing can have, obviously. Some of the furniture in Animal Crossing is really cute and makes me want to buy it. Maybe you want to play Megalovania during Big Band Super because it's funny. Go figure out what gifts an NPC likes in Stardew Valley so you can romance the hell out of them. If you want to go on a power trip and feel like you're invincible, play some Dynasty Warriors to beat up hundreds of dudes at a time. Emotional appeal like this adds plenty of value, but is naturally the most subjective of things. But an example of ineffective emotional appeal for someone is if they don't care about the stylish ranking in Devil May Cry. In order to raise your stylish ranking, you need to use a bunch of different moves and not really get hit. The ranks start at D and go all the way up to triple S. Seeing that triple S on the screen makes me feel good and accomplished. But if that ranking has no effect on someone, it's not going to motivate them to do much else other than hit Y a bunch of times and move on. And while I won't police the way people play games, I will say that
what you lack is this.
I'll leave emotional appeal at that, as there's an infinite number of reasons why something can appeal to you personally, and I'm just not an expert on psychology. The final component that I'd like to talk about is much more definitive though. Ease of access. Closely tied in with pacing, the easier mechanics of a game are going to be learned more quickly. Let's jump back into Devil May Cry 4. Mashing that Y button is only so difficult. Pressing A to jump, RB to lock on, then tilting the stick back, forward, and then hitting Y just to do Caliber? That's a bit of a leap. If something is more difficult to do, it might make someone not want to attempt learning it until they've honed their skills first. though some may even find difficult moves to be an appealing challenge. Then there's the matter of needing to discover more hidden techniques. Projectile boosting your shotgun bullets in Ultrakill is not the most easy thing to accidentally do. You can be told this directly if you go into the shop menu and look at the shotgun's information, but not everyone's going to do that. Sometimes abilities or features are even context sensitive, requiring you to be at a certain place at a certain time under certain conditions. Wait, I can grab him out of that? So if you don't know them or they're not apparent, you might not learn them. There's many ways a game can motivate you to learn it. So many that most games won't get everything right. Combine that with your personal preferences and you're likely to run into times where you simply lose interest in learning, whether that's an entire game or just a single feature. So what can you do as the player to mitigate this? A good first step would be to analyze what a game isn't doing for you. Is the pacing a bit too fast or slow? If you're picking up a fighting game and the entire move list is overwhelming you, find guides on how to play characters, or guides on even how to pick a character. If you don't know the value of a move, ability, or feature, look it up. Take the time to go through the menus and tutorials if you haven't. It might be very useful, but you just didn't notice. If something just doesn't vibe with you, try not to just ignore it. Maybe you can cook those fish you caught in the JRPG fishing minigame, and maybe they give you giant buffs. As far as ease of access goes, make sure you're playing at a difficulty that suits you. And while there are built-in levels of game difficulty, there's also your own play style's level of difficulty. If you mainly like pulling off difficult strategies or moves but can't quite pull it off yet, just practice some more. Go into practice mode or try the earlier levels again, and don't feel ashamed. At the end of the day, the main things that will help you are patience and perseverance. Take a step back every now and then to analyze how you're feeling a game and find out why. Whether it's a new game you're picking up or a game you've played for 10 years and are finally getting bored of. Is now a bad time to pick up this game? Maybe you need to wait until the busy season of your job is over. Think about your needs and try games accordingly. Maybe all you need is high-octane action. Maybe you need something to calm down with, though. This may or may not be doable, but minimize distractions and other limitations. But either way, be realistic about what you can pick up right now. You don't want to be some guy with a 99.9% disconnection rating in a fighting game. Have some patience with a game too. Hi-Fi Rush wasn't really grooving with me until I got the ability to parry. But that's about it. What do you think? I'd love to hear what games or specific mechanics or features or whatever you liked, loved, hated, couldn't wrap your head around, anything. Likes and subscribing is always appreciated, but blowing up my comment section with some further discussion on the topic would be my absolute favorite. Do you think I left anything out? Am I blatantly wrong about something? Let me know. Feedback is always appreciated as well. For now, thank you for watching and have a good one.